2:37 in the morning. A bullet-riddled SUV exploded through the emergency bay doors of a clinic buried under 6 feet of Montana snow. The driver was already dead. The passenger, an Army captain with 3 rounds in his chest and a classified drive clutched in his fist, had maybe 4 minutes before his heart gave out permanently. And somewhere behind him, cutting through the blizzard on unmarked vehicles with the headlights off, came the men who'd already killed his entire team. One nurse stood between them and the body they needed to finish. They thought she was just a nurse. That was the last mistake they ever made. If this story grips you, hit follow, drop a like, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go. The storm had been building since sundown. By midnight, it owned the valley. The kind of storm that doesn't announce itself with wind or thunder. It simply arrives, the way bad news does, quietly and all at once. Snow swallowed the county road in both directions. The satellite dish on the clinic roof had been iced over since 11, which meant no weather updates, no reliable communication with Billings dispatch, and no real sense of what the night still had planned. Nurse Nora Vance stood at the supply room window, watching the storm press itself flat against the glass, and drank coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago without noticing. She'd been on since 6 the previous evening. 8 hours in, she still had 4 to go, and the most dramatic thing that had happened was a retired cattle rancher named Herschel Pruitt coming in with 2 frostbitten toes and an attitude about the wait time. She'd dressed his toes. He'd complained anyway. She'd smiled and said, "Mr. Pruitt, you're welcome." He'd grumbled something and left. That was the night, as far as Nora could tell. She was wrong. The supply room sat at the back of the clinic, separated from the ambulance bay by a corridor and a set of heavy fire doors, which meant Nora felt the impact before she heard it, a deep, bone-level vibration that traveled up through the floor and into her feet like a concussive wave. Coffee sloshed over her fingers. The fluorescent light above her flickered once, held, flickered again. Then the sound caught up, a catastrophic crunch of steel and safety glass, an alarm shrieking to life, and somewhere beneath all of it, a sound she hadn't heard in 6 years but recognized instantly. A human being, screaming. She was already moving. The ambulance bay looked like a war zone. That was her first thought, clinical and immediate, the way her brain had been trained to process chaos. An SUV, black, late model, government-plated, had punched through the bay's reinforced doors at speed. The front end was crumpled around the exterior pillar. Steam poured from the hood. One headlight still worked, pointing uselessly at the ceiling. The other was buried in the wall. The windshield was gone. The driver was still in his seat. What was left of him? Nora clocked it in half a second and looked away. Not from squeamishness, but from triage. The driver was not a patient. The driver was a scene. The passenger door hung open. A man was on the floor of the bay, dragging himself away from the vehicle on one arm. His left leg wasn't responding. His jacket, tactical, dark green, no insignia, was saturated from the right shoulder down, the blood so dark it looked black under the fluorescent overheads. He'd left a trail of it behind him on the concrete, 2 feet, maybe 3, before his arm gave out and he stopped moving. Nora crossed the bay in seconds. "I've got you," she said, dropping to her knees beside him. "Stay still. Don't try to—" "Don't!" His voice was barely above a rasp, hoarse and broken, but his eyes were open, alert in a way that didn't match the amount of blood he'd lost. "Don't call anyone." "Sir, you're bleeding from at least 2. "Don't call anyone." His right hand came up and grabbed her wrist. Hard. His grip was wrong for someone in his condition. Too controlled, too deliberate. She felt the object before she saw it, a matte black rectangle the size of a thick wallet, pressed into her palm. "Keep this. Don't let go of it. Don't plug it into anything." Nora looked at the object, looked back at him. "What's your name?" "Holloway." A cough rattled through him. "Captain Reed Holloway. Army Reconnaissance." His eyes stayed on hers, steady even as his breathing deteriorated. "Listen to me. My team is dead. All 4 of them. There's a unit, private security, but they're military trained. They're maybe 8 minutes behind me." He paused to breathe, which cost him. "Maybe less. They're coming to take that drive, and they are going to kill every person in this building who has seen it." Nora heard what he was telling her. She also heard his respiratory rate, Shallow, rapid, the wet quality underneath it that meant one lung was compromised. She heard his pulse when she pressed 2 fingers to his carotid, fast and thready, the rhythm of a body running on borrowed time. She made her decision. "Okay," she said, and tucked the drive into the front pocket of her scrubs. "Talk to me while I work. What's your blood type?" He blinked, like he'd expected something else from her. "Oh, negative." "Of course it is." She was already calling back toward the corridor. "Marcus, Bay 2, now. I need a gurney and the trauma kit. Bring the portable monitor." Marcus Webb, 26 years old and 8 months into his first job as a clinical assistant, came through the fire doors at a jog and stopped dead when he saw the SUV. Jesus. "Language," Nora said, not looking up from the pressure she was applying to Holloway's shoulder. "Gurney, go." He went. Dr. Elias Brenner arrived 40 seconds later, which told Nora he'd been in the break room rather than his office. His office was farther away. He was 51, department chief, gray at the temples, and possessed of the specific kind of authority that came from never having been seriously wrong about anything in a professional context. He was a good physician. He was also the kind of man who made up his mind about a situation in the first 3 seconds of observing it and spent the next 10 minutes defending that assessment. He took in the scene. His eyes moved from the destroyed vehicle to Holloway on the concrete to Nora applying pressure with both hands. "My God," he said. "Nora, has anyone called?" "Phones are down," she said. "Storm took the lines around midnight, I checked." "The satellite emergency, yeah, down too. Ice on the dish." Brenner processed this. "The radio and dispatch. Marcus is trying it." She looked up at him. "Dr. Brenner, right shoulder, likely 1 round still seated. Possible pneumothorax left side, BP is dropping. He needs—" "I can see what he needs, Nora. I'm asking about protocol." "Protocol right now is keeping this man alive long enough to have a protocol conversation." She met his eyes, held them. "Are you going to help me, or do you want to stand there?" A beat. Brenner's jaw worked. Then he crossed the bay and crouched opposite her. They got Holloway onto the gurney, got him moving, and Nora was halfway through her second set of vitals when Marcus came back from dispatch with the look on his face that she'd been bracing for. "Radio's dead," he said. "I don't mean no signal. I mean dead. Like something's blocking it." Nora didn't look up from her work. "Lock the front entrance, side entrance too. The loading dock. What's the status?" "It was locked before the—" He gestured at the destroyed bay doors, which were currently hanging off their hinges in the storm. "That happened. Get every rolling cart and equipment rack you can find and block that opening. Don't worry about damaging anything. Just get it blocked." Brenner stared at her. "Nora, you cannot just—" "Captain Holloway says there are armed men coming to this clinic. Tonight. Right now." She finally looked up, and something in her face must have landed because Brenner stopped talking. "I don't know if he's right. I hope he's not. But if he is, and I do nothing, people die. So I'm choosing the option where I'm wrong, and we look foolish versus the option where I'm wrong and we're dead." She held his gaze. "Lock it down, Elias, please." Something shifted behind Brenner's eyes. He wasn't convinced. She could tell. But he wasn't stopping her either. "Marcus," he said quietly, "do what she said." Holloway's blood pressure had dropped to 88/60 by the time they had him in Trauma Bay 1. Nora worked fast, hands moving through the motions with a muscle memory precision that had nothing to do with clinic nursing and everything to do with 3 years she never talked about at work. 3 years of forward operating bases and helicopter LZs and men bleeding in the dirt with no OR for 40 miles. She'd learned to work in conditions that would have horrified the version of herself who'd graduated nursing school at 22. Learned to make decisions that her instructors had told her only physicians could make, because in the field there sometimes wasn't a physician, and the patient didn't care about the distinction. She packed the shoulder wound, got 2 large bore IVs running, and was assessing the chest when Holloway's hand found her wrist again. "How many staff?" he said. "In the building." "Right now, me, Dr. Brenner, Marcus, our night receptionist Sandra, and a patient who came in with a broken arm 2 hours ago. He's in room 3. 6 civilians." His eyes moved to the ceiling, calculating. "Rusk runs 8, maybe 10 if they brought backup." He coughed again. "He'll split them. 2 on the perimeter in case someone tries to run. The rest come in hard and fast. Rusk. Dorian Rusk, he's the commander. A pause. He used to be Army. He knows what he's doing. Nora pressed a stethoscope to his chest, listened. The left side told her what she'd feared. "You have a partial pneumothorax," she said. "I need to address that, or... Can you?" She hesitated for half a second. "Yes." "Then do it." He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since she'd found him on the floor of the bay. "Where'd you train? And I don't mean here." She didn't answer, pulled on gloves and reached for a chest decompression kit. The lights went out. Not the flicker and return of a power surge. All of it. Every overhead, every monitor display, every LED above every doorway, gone at once, as if the building had simply stopped existing in the electrical sense. The emergency lighting snapped on 3 seconds later, red, dim, casting everything in the color of old blood. Nora worked by feel for those 3 seconds. She'd done it before. When the red lights came up, she finished what she was doing without stopping. From somewhere in the front of the clinic, she heard Sandra make a sound. Not quite a scream, more like a syllable that got caught halfway out. Then she heard boots on the lobby floor. Multiple sets. Heavy. Measured. The sound of people who knew how to enter a building. The intercom crackled. Black Pine County Clinic had an internal PA system. One of those decade-old setups with speakers in every room, ceiling-mounted. The kind that usually broadcast things like, "Dr. Brenner, you have a call on line 2. The microphone was at the reception desk, which meant whoever was on it had walked through the front entrance and made themselves at home at Sandra's station. The voice that came through was unhurried, almost pleasant, in the way that cold weather was pleasant to someone standing outside of it. "Good morning, everyone. I apologize for the disruption." A brief pause, static, then, "My name is Rusk. I need a few minutes of your time, and then this will all be over. Somewhere in this clinic, there's a patient named Holloway. He came in with an injury and a piece of hardware that doesn't belong to him. All I need is that hardware and a brief conversation with Captain Holloway. If I get what I need, my people and I leave, the lights come back on, and you all have a very interesting story to tell your families." Another pause. "If I don't get what I need, well, let's not talk about that, because I'd rather we keep this simple." The PA clicked off. The red emergency lights pulsed. Brenner found Nora in Trauma Bay 1, still beside Holloway, and his face had lost whatever composure it had managed to maintain in the hours since the SUV came through the wall. "He said..." Brenner's voice dropped to a whisper, like whispering mattered. "Nora, he said if we cooperate." "He said a lot of things." She was cutting Holloway's jacket away, checking for secondary injuries. A long laceration on his left forearm, already clotting, bruising across his ribs that would need imaging when they had power. He didn't say he'd let Holloway walk out of here. "If we give them what they want..." "Elias..." She set down her scissors and looked at him fully. "Do you know what's on that drive?" He stared. "No, neither do I. But Holloway's 4 teammates are dead tonight. 4 soldiers." She kept her voice low, flat, controlled. "You think a man like Rusk leaves witnesses?" The room was quiet except for Holloway's monitor. The battery backup on the portable unit, at least, was holding. Brenner looked at the patient, then back at Nora, then at the door. "Then what do we do?" "We buy time." She was already moving. "Help me move him." "Where?" Imaging, lead-lined walls, reinforced door, 1 point of entry. She pulled the IV pole alongside the gurney and started unlocking the wheels. "It won't stop them forever. But it doesn't need to. It just needs to slow them down." Brenner didn't move immediately. He stood there with his hands at his sides, this man who had always known what to do, looking at a woman he'd always thought of as just the quiet night nurse, and something in his face that Nora didn't have time to examine closely was reshaping itself. "I don't..." He stopped, started again. "I don't understand what you are." "Right now?" She met his eyes. "I'm the plan. Are you going to help me or not?" A long second. He crossed the room and took the other side of the gurney. They moved Holloway through the red-lit corridor in silence, Marcus clearing the path ahead, Nora watching the shadows. The clinic's main corridor ran the length of the building. 40 feet, 2 junctions, 3 rooms that branched off on either side. In the daylight, it was unremarkable. In the red emergency light, with armed men moving somewhere beyond the far set of doors, it felt like a mine shaft. She counted exits without thinking about it, counted angles. Old habit. The imaging suite was at the back of the building, past the break room, past the storage closet that nobody ever cleaned out. The door was heavy. Nora had always thought it was over-engineered for a county clinic, until Marcus had explained that they'd received the door as surplus from a facility that had done radiological work. Lead-lined, 2 inches of composite steel. She got Holloway through, got the door shut, got Marcus to slide the manual bolt. Holloway's eyes found her in the red light. "Good move," he said. His voice was stronger than it had any right to be. The chest decompression was helping. "But they'll find us." "I know." "And they'll breach." "I know." "So what's the play?" She checked his vitals, checked the drive in her pocket, a reflex. Looked at the door. "The play," she said slowly, "is that Rusk thinks we're scared civilians." She glanced at him. "He's going to act like it, and when people act like the other person is less than they are, they stop paying attention." Holloway was quiet for a moment. "Who were you?" he said finally. "Before this?" Before she could answer, something hit the door. Not a knock. The flat concussive crack of a shaped charge being positioned against the frame. Nora reached for the crash cart. The door didn't open yet, but the sound that followed, the soft, deliberate sound of someone on the other side working with practiced efficiency, was worse than any alarm. It was the sound of someone who had done this before, someone who was not planning to stop. The bolt on the imaging suite door had a tensile rating of 800 pounds. The charge they'd used on the embassy job in Prague had exceeded 1,200. Rusk had brought Prague charges. The door blew inward. Smoke. Dust. The overhead track lights, dead like everything else, swayed on their mounts from the percussion. A section of the frame had come away from the wall. The bolt, that 800-pound bolt, was simply gone. Somewhere in the debris on the floor or embedded in the opposite wall, and it didn't matter which. What mattered was the figure stepping through the opening. He was big, not the kind of big that was accidental, the kind that was maintained and deliberate, the kind that came from years of being in environments where being big was the difference between surviving and not. Full tactical kit, plate carrier, thigh rig, comms earpiece, helmet-mounted light blazing into the room. He moved with the sharp, economical efficiency of someone who had cleared 100 rooms and stopped being impressed by the contents a long time ago. He saw Holloway first, saw the patient on the gurney, the monitor, the IVs. Then he looked down, and he saw the nurse on the floor between him and the patient, with blood on her scrubs from earlier that had dried almost black in the red light. And he made the same decision Brenner had made and Rusk had made, and almost everyone made when they looked at Nora Vance. He decided she didn't matter. He raised the rifle. Nora was already moving. She didn't think about it. That was the thing people got wrong about courage. They imagined it as a considered decision, a moment of weighing and choosing, when really it was more like muscle memory. The body moving before the brain caught up. 3 years of forward operating bases didn't leave a person. They became a person. She came off the floor in the half-second that his attention was on Holloway and put herself between the rifle and the gurney with everything she had. The round hit her left shoulder. The force of it was nothing like the movies. It was a physical argument, sudden, massive, final, that slammed her sideways into the equipment rack and sent the rack into the wall and sent her into the floor. Cold. The floor was very cold. Her cheek was against the tile, and she could see under the gurney, could see the man's boots approaching, and she thought distantly, clinically, the way she always thought when things went wrong. Assess damage, prioritize, next action. Her right arm was fine, her left arm was not responding. Her vision had a white perimeter that wasn't great. The boots stopped in front of her. The rifle swung up again. And then the building moved. Not from an explosion, from outside. A vibration that started somewhere high above them. Through the ceiling, through the roof, through the 2 feet of Montana snow that had accumulated on top of it. And it grew, until it wasn't a vibration anymore but a sound. A specific, unmistakable sound that Nora knew in the same deep-body way she knew her own heartbeat. Rotor blades. Not one aircraft, multiple. The lights on the helicopter-mounted strobes hit the skylight above the imaging suite and strobed through the frosted glass. White, white, white. And the mercenary with the rifle looked up at the glass because every human animal looks toward the light when it suddenly appears. And in the second that he looked away, the crash of the upper floor access door 30 feet down the corridor, the sharp, clipped call and response of a breach team moving with the mechanical coordination of people who had trained until individuality stopped and unit became the only identity that mattered. Breach, breach, leash, left clear, right clear, moving. The mercenary dropped back toward the blown door of the imaging suite, his priorities reorganizing rapidly. He looked at Holloway. He looked at Nora on the floor. He made a calculation. He left. Nora lay on the tile, breathing through her teeth, and counted the rotor sounds. 4 helicopters. Maybe 5. She thought, not bad. She thought, Holloway, your people came. She thought, now stay alive long enough to matter. Then she reached up, grabbed the side of the gurney with her right hand, and pulled herself partly upright. Holloway. Her voice was level, barely. Talk to me. From above the gurney, a slow exhale. Still here? Good. She got one knee under herself. Me too. I can see that. A pause. You're crazy. I've been told. She got the other knee, got her feet under herself. Stood, which was harder than she made it look, because she decided to make it look like nothing at all. She checked his IV lines, both still running, good. Checked the monitor, pulse 98, weak but consistent. She pressed her right hand to her left shoulder and felt the landscape of it, the specific wrongness of a round that had gone through rather than seeded, which was exactly as awful as it sounded, and also the better of the two options. He's coming back, Holloway said. I know. Or Rusk sends someone else. I know. So tell me what you need, he said, because you're still the one with the plan, and I'm the one with the bullet holes who can't stand up. Nora looked at the blown open door, at the smoke still drifting in from the corridor, at the red emergency lights pulsing like a slow heartbeat above their heads. Somewhere above them, gunfire, short, controlled bursts, the professional sound of a close-quarters engagement in a confined space. Somewhere below them, she realized, silence, which was wrong. Rusk wasn't in the corridor. Rusk wasn't on the upper floor getting taken apart by special operations. Rusk had been on the intercom, which meant Rusk had been at reception, which meant Rusk was between the lobby and the basement. Her hand went to her pocket. The drive was still there. She thought about what Holloway had told her. 8, maybe 10 men. Sloane's team had hit the upper floor. She could hear the engagement, count the exchanges, and the exchange was already going quiet, which meant one side or the other had stopped participating, and given the sound of those rotors, she had a strong opinion about which side. But Rusk wasn't upstairs, and Brenner was. And Sandra. Nora looked at Holloway. I have to go, she said. Nora, your heart rate is stable. The line in your right arm is wide open. You've got enough volume to hold for 15 minutes if you stay still. She stripped off her outer layer, a clinic-issue zip-up, and pressed it against her shoulder, one-handed, tying the sleeves across her chest to maintain pressure. It was improvised and inadequate, and it was what she had. Don't disconnect any lines. Don't try to get up. I'm not the one I'm worried about getting up, he said. She met his eyes. I know, she said. That's why I'm going. She walked out through the blown door into the smoke-heavy corridor, past the debris, past the ruined frame, past the 800-pound bolt that had ended up 6 feet from where it started, embedded, she noted absently, in the drywall at roughly chest height. And she moved through the red light toward the basement stairs. One hand braced against the wall, one hand holding the drive. And somewhere below her she could already smell it, the specific chemical smell of a detonator primer. Rusk hadn't lost. Rusk had relocated. The basement stairs were 9 steps down, which Nora knew because she'd counted them on her third shift here, the way she counted everything, exits, angles, distances. Not out of anxiety, but out of the same quiet habit that made her check expiration dates on medication without thinking about it. Information was weight you carried before you needed it. She took the stairs one at a time, right hand trailing the wall, left arm held close to her body and throbbing with a deep, bone-level persistence that she filed away and did not engage with. Pain was data. Data was useful. Getting sentimental about data was not. The chemical smell was stronger now. Detonator primer had a specific quality to it. Synthetic, slightly sweet in a way that felt wrong. The way things that could kill you sometimes presented as pleasant. She'd smelled it in 2 countries she wasn't supposed to have been in, and her body remembered before her brain finished processing. Her breathing went shallow and deliberate without her telling it to. The basement resolved out of the red emergency light in layers. Concrete floor, pipe runs overhead, the bulk of the utility systems, water heater, electrical junction, and the oxygen manifold that fed the clinic's central supply line. It was a big manifold for a small clinic, because Black Pine County had applied for a federal rural health care grant 8 years ago and bought infrastructure for a facility 3 times its size, which meant there was enough pressurized oxygen in this basement to turn the upper floors into something you'd find in a news photograph. Rusk had found it immediately. He was standing behind an overturned medical cart, 2 of them, actually, pushed together to form a rough barricade near the oxygen system. And he had Brenner on his left and Sandra on his right. Sandra was the clinic's night receptionist, 23 years old, 3 weeks into the job, and she was holding herself with the rigid stillness of someone whose body had made an executive decision to not move at all and was enforcing it aggressively. Brenner was less still. His hands were out in front of him, the classic posture of a man trying to make himself appear non-threatening and mostly just appearing terrified. Rusk held a detonator in his right hand. It was a small thing, matte black, single trigger, the kind of device that didn't need to be dramatic about what it did. He held it loosely, almost casually, the way a man holds his keys while waiting for an elevator. He looked at Nora when she came off the last stair. He took in the improvised shoulder dressing, the right hand against the wall, the pace that was controlled but not quite right. He took in the blood on her scrubs and the set of her face and the fact that she was here at all, walking into a basement that smelled like primer, and she watched him do the math and come up with the answer that everyone came up with. "You're the nurse," he said. "I am." "You're the one who moved him to imaging." "I am." He tilted his head slightly. Not surprised exactly. More like a man updating a minor piece of information in a ledger that was otherwise balanced. "That was smart. The lid walls." A pause. "Didn't help, though." "No," she said. It didn't. She stopped at the base of the stairs, 10 feet from the barricade. Far enough that she wasn't crowding him, close enough that he couldn't split his attention too far. She could see the wiring that ran from the detonator through the gap in the cart to the manifold. Not elaborate, not showy, competent. The work of someone who knew what he needed and used exactly that and nothing more. She also saw, on the floor behind Sandra's feet, a zip tie. Just one. Which meant they'd been cuffed, and one had gotten loose or been cut, and Rusk hadn't bothered replacing it because he had the detonator, and he'd decided that was enough. It probably was enough. She filed it away. "I need the module," Rusk said. He didn't raise his voice, didn't adjust his posture. He simply stated it the way you'd state a preference about coffee. "You're carrying it. Don't." He added the last word as her hand moved slightly, not toward the pocket, but just shifted with her weight. "I'll know the difference." "I know you will." He watched her. "Then take it out slowly and set it on the floor." Nora didn't move. Brenner's eyes found her from behind the barricade. She could read the message in them clearly. "Please, Nora, just do what he says. Just give it to him. He has a detonator and we have nothing." And she understood it, and she understood where it came from, and she also understood that Brenner was running the math wrong. Not because he was stupid, because he hadn't been in rooms like this before. And people who hadn't been in rooms like this before consistently underestimated how much the dynamic shifted the moment you gave someone who already held a detonator the last thing they needed. "The men upstairs," she said. "What about them?" "Your men. The ones who came in through the front. How many did you bring in total?" Something moved behind his eyes. "Not much. A calculation being reviewed. This isn't a negotiation." "I'm not negotiating." She kept her voice even. "I'm establishing a picture because you came in with, 8, 10? And right now Major Sloan's people are working through your team floor by floor." She paused. "You can hear it's quiet up there. That happened fast." Rusk's jaw didn't move. His eyes didn't move. But his hand tightened fractionally on the detonator. "You've been down here since the helicopters arrived," Nora continued. You heard the rotors and you came straight down here, which means you'd already identified the oxygen system as your exit option before the breach team ever hit the roof. She watched him. That's good planning. That's the kind of planning that keeps a man alive. But it also means you're not getting a signal down here. You don't know what's left of your team, and you're running on the assumption that threatening to detonate this building gives you leverage. A beat. It gives you leverage over me. I don't know if it gives you leverage over Sloan. It gives me leverage over everyone in this building. Yes, and everyone in this building includes your exit route. She let that land. You detonate, you lose the module. If you lose the module, whatever you came here for is over anyway. The basement was very quiet. Sandra hadn't moved. Brenner hadn't moved. Rusk hadn't moved. Then Rusk did something she hadn't expected. He smiled. It was a small thing, controlled, and it didn't reach anything above his mouth. "Who are you?" he said. "I told you. I'm the nurse." "No." He studied her in a way that felt like being taken apart and reassembled more slowly than was comfortable. "No, you're not. A nurse doesn't walk into this room. A nurse gives the module to my man upstairs and hopes for the best." The smile faded. "You walked past him to get here, didn't you?" She didn't answer. What happened to Garner? His voice had changed. Still calm, but the pleasant quality was gone, stripped off to reveal something flat and focused underneath. "The man I sent to imaging, what happened to him?" "He left," Nora said. "He left. When the helicopters hit the roof, he made a calculation." "Garner doesn't make unilateral calculations." "He did tonight." She held his gaze. "People do unexpected things when they realize the situation's changed." Rusk was quiet for a moment. She watched him process this. The fact that Garner had pulled back, the fact that the upper floor had gone quiet, the fact that this woman in blood-stained scrubs with a ruined shoulder was standing at the base of his basement stairs and talking to him like someone who had been in worse rooms than this one and hadn't found this one particularly special. "Give me the module," he said. The pleasantness was completely gone now. "I'm not asking again." "I know you're not." She reached into her pocket, and he watched her hand, and she brought the drive out and held it up so he could see it. Then she looked at the floor, at the exposed concrete, and she set the drive down. Slowly, carefully. On the first step of the basement stairs, one step above the floor level, far enough that he'd have to come to her side of the room to get it. She didn't step away from it. Rusk looked at the drive on the step, looked at her standing next to it, looked at the detonator in his hand. "You're not going to give it to me," he said. "I'm giving you a choice," she said. "You come get it, or I destroy it." She reached down with her right hand and picked up a heavy steel calibration block from the equipment shelf beside the stairs. 8 pounds of solid steel, the kind of thing that sat on imaging equipment to verify measurement accuracy and could, in theory, turn a data module into component debris in a single strike. She held it above the drive. "You detonate, I lose the building and everyone in it, but you lose the module. So neither of us wins." She felt the weight of the block, the cold of it through her palm. "But if you come get it, you leave these two people alone, you walk out of here with what you came for, and we both get to be alive tomorrow." Brenner made a sound, not words, just air force through his teeth. The sound of a man watching someone he doesn't understand do something he can't follow. Sandra was looking at Nora with an expression that was half raw terror and half something else, something that Nora didn't have time to examine. Rusk didn't move for a long moment. Then he said, "Step away from it." "Come get it," she said. "I will blow this building down around you." "Then do it." Her voice didn't waver. It was the hardest thing she'd done since she came down the stairs, holding that tone, keeping her hand steady with the calibration block above the drive. "But you know what happens if you do. So make a decision, Rusk. You're burning time." The detonator. His hand around it. She watched his fingers. Not his face. His face was managed, professional, designed to give nothing away. But hands told the truth. She'd learned that the hard way, in a courtyard in a country she wasn't going to name, from a man who'd been very calm right up until he wasn't, and the only warning had been a subtle shift in the tension of his fingers 3 seconds before everything changed. Rusk's fingers were still. Too still. She recognized it. The stillness before a decision has been fully made, when the body holds itself in suspension, waiting for the mind to finish its calculation. Her shoulder was burning in a way that had stopped being just pain and was becoming something more systemic, a slow, insistent notification that her body was managing a significant problem and would like more resources than it was currently being allocated. Her vision had a quality to it that she didn't love. The white perimeter was back, at the edges, not enough to impair her, just enough to remind her that she was running on a deficit that would eventually need to be addressed. She thought about Holloway upstairs, about the IV lines she'd left running, the monitor on battery backup, about 15 minutes, the number she'd given him, and how much of those 15 minutes were left. She thought about Sloane's team on the upper floor, and whether they knew where Rusk had gone, and whether anyone had told them about the basement and the oxygen manifold and the very small black device in Rusk's very still hand. She thought about Brenner, who had said, "I don't understand what you are in the red light of the trauma bay." And she thought about how strange it was, the things people decided about you based on the context in which they met you. She had been the night nurse for 2 years at this clinic. She had taken temperatures and changed dressings and argued with insurance companies on behalf of patients who didn't have the energy to argue for themselves. And she had been good at it, and she had been mostly invisible in the way that competent people in service roles often were, and nobody had ever looked at her and seen the other thing, which was fine. She'd chosen that. The other thing wasn't a costume she'd taken off and hung up somewhere. It was just a part of her that she didn't broadcast, the way some people didn't broadcast that they'd been through a divorce or survived a flood or rebuilt something from nothing after losing it. It was hers, and she kept it. Until a black SUV came through the bay doors at 2:37 in the morning and she stopped keeping it. "Last chance," Rusk said. "That's mine to say," she said, "not yours." And then from directly above them, through the ceiling, through the concrete and the pipe runs and the floor of the clinic above, came a sound she recognized. A voice, male, clipped, carrying the specific flat authority of someone running a tactical operation who had just located the information he was looking for. "Basement, 2 hostages and 1 priority target. Stack up." Rusk heard it too. His head went up. His fingers moved on the detonator. Nora dropped the calibration block 6 inches. Not a full swing, a controlled descent. And it landed on the drive with a crack that filled the basement. Rusk's hand froze. She lifted the block. The drive was still intact. She hadn't brought full force, had caught the edge of the casing rather than the central housing, and she'd done it deliberately. But Rusk didn't know that. What Rusk saw was the block coming down, the crack of impact, and her lifting it again with the drive still beneath it. "That was a demonstration," she said. Her voice was steady in a way that cost her something she'd deal with later. "Next one finishes it." The detonator was still in his hand. He hadn't triggered it. He was looking at her with an expression that had moved entirely out of the professional category and into something rawer. Not fear, not exactly, but the look of a man who has been running a successful operation and has encountered a variable that doesn't fit any of his categories. "You're bluffing," he said. "Try me," she said. Somewhere above them, boots on the stairs. Rusk looked at the door at the top of the stairs, looked at the detonator, looked at the drive under the calibration block and the woman holding the calibration block, and the blood on her shoulder and the fact that she had not moved 1 inch since she took her position at the base of the stairs. His jaw worked. "Who sent you?" he said. The question caught her off guard. Not the words themselves, but the way he asked them, with a kind of genuine bewilderment that didn't belong on a face like his. Like she was the thing in this basement that didn't make sense, not him, not the detonator, not the zip-tied hostages. Her. "Nobody sent me," she said. "People like you don't end up in places like this by accident." "People like me," she repeated. Combat-trained, tactically literate, running a containment scenario with a blown shoulder in a basement with no backup. He tilted his head. "Nobody sent you, sure." "I used to be different things," she said. "Now I'm the night nurse. Those aren't mutually exclusive." The boots on the stairs were louder. Rusk looked up one more time. His hand loosened on the detonator, a fraction, barely visible, but she saw it because she was watching for it. She thought, right now, she thought, this is the second. She thought, if you're going to hold this line, hold it now. "Rusk," she said. He looked at her. "Put it down." The boots hit the landing above the basement door. The handle moved. Rusk's eyes went to the door, back to her. back to the drive under the calibration block, and she watched the calculation run its final iteration behind his eyes. Everything he'd come for, everything the operation was built on, the one piece of intelligence that made the last 3 months and 4 dead soldiers and a burning SUV in a Montana snowstorm mean something. All of it. Under 8 pounds of steel. In the hand of a night nurse who shouldn't have been here. The basement door opened, and Dorian Rusk, commander of the strike team, former Army and current Ghost, made a decision. He moved. He moved toward the drive. Not toward the door, not toward the stairs. Toward her. Toward the step where the drive sat under 8 pounds of calibration steel, which meant he'd made his calculation, and the calculation was that the module was worth more than the exit, worth more than the detonator option, worth more than whatever Sloane's team was about to bring through that door. Nora had approximately 1 second to decide whether she'd been bluffing. She hadn't been. She brought the block down full force. The crack was enormous in the concrete space. A flat, hard sound that bounced off every surface and came back changed, and the drive casing split along its seam and skittered off the step in 2 pieces. Rusk stopped moving. His face did something that wasn't quite an expression, more like the absence of one. The specific blankness of a man watching the thing he came for cease to exist. The basement door came off its hinges, not opened. Off its hinges. The breach team hit it with a ram and it came away from the frame and went down the stairs ahead of them. And the 2 operators who followed it into the basement moved with the compressed, deliberate speed of people who had stopped thinking in individual terms and become a single functioning unit. They were through the doorway and splitting angles before the door finished clattering on the concrete floor. Contact left was detonator. I see it. Rusk turned towards him with the detonator still in his hand, and one of the operators took him at the wrist. Not a tackle, not a shout, just a controlled, economical movement that wrapped Rusk's hand inside both of his and removed the leverage from his fingers before Rusk's body had fully processed that contact had been made. The detonator hit the floor. The operator's boot came down on it. The second operator was already at the manifold, checking the wiring with a small flashlight held between his teeth, hands moving over the connection points with the focused attention of someone who had done explosive ordnance work and wasn't panicking about it. "Device is stable," he said, around the flashlight. "Give me 90 seconds. Rusk was on his knees. His hands were behind him. He wasn't fighting it. The math had changed too fast, and men like Rusk understood math better than they understood almost anything else. Brenner was against the wall, his legs not entirely cooperating, sliding down to sit on the floor with his back against the concrete. Sandra was beside him, and she had her hand over her mouth, and she was breathing in a way that was going to need attention in a few minutes, but was currently a lower priority than the explosive ordnance being disconnected from the oxygen manifold 8 feet away. Nora set the calibration block down on the step. Her left arm informed her, loudly and specifically, that the action of swinging the block had cost something real. She leaned her right shoulder against the wall of the stairwell and stayed there, because staying there felt like the correct amount of movement for the immediate future. A figure came down the stairs behind the breach team. Major Grant Sloane was not what she'd expected from the voice on the floor above. The voice had suggested someone larger, somehow broader, in the way authority sometimes presented as physical mass. Sloane was maybe 5'10", lean in the way that field work made people lean, and he moved through the basement with an economy of motion that reminded her, involuntarily, of the best team leaders she'd worked alongside in another life. He took in the room in one sweep. The operators, Rusk on his knees, the EOD work on the manifold, Brenner and Sandra against the wall, the split drive casing on the step. Then he looked at Nora. She was still leaning against the stairwell wall. Blood had soaked through the improvised dressing and was moving down her arm in a thin line that she could feel but not see in the red light. Her scrubs had gone stiff at the shoulder. She was holding herself together by a combination of training and stubbornness, and she suspected the ratio was shifting. Sloane walked toward her. "You're Vance," he said. Not a question. "How'd you know?" "Holloway told us." He stopped in front of her and looked at the shoulder with the clinical attention of a man who'd seen this kind of wound before and was assessing rather than reacting. "He's been awake for the last 10 minutes. He talks a lot, for someone with a pneumothorax." "He talks a lot normally," she said. She was mildly surprised that she knew that. She'd known him for less than 2 hours. Sloane's eyes moved to the step, to the shattered drive casing. Is that? Yes. A beat. Is it salvageable? I don't know. I'm a nurse, not a forensic data tech. She looked at the pieces. The outer casing is destroyed. The internal housing might be intact. I controlled the strike. I aimed for the seam rather than the center. Sloane looked at her. You aimed for the seam, he said slowly. I didn't want to destroy the evidence. I wanted him to believe I would. She met Sloane's eyes. There's a difference. Sloane was quiet for a moment in the specific way of someone resorting a category. She'd seen the look before, too. The look that meant, I had a file on this situation, and the file was wrong. You need a medical team, he said. I need to check on my patient first. My medic is with Holloway right now. I know. She pushed off the wall. I'm still going up. He didn't stop her. She would have gone anyway, but she appreciated that he didn't try. The stairs were 9 steps up. She counted them again on the way up, because that was the kind of thing her brain did when her body was managing a significant repair job and wanted to keep the higher functions occupied with something simple. 9 steps. Pipe runs overhead. The smell of primer fading behind her, replaced by dust and the spent plastic smell of the blown imaging suite door, and underneath it, fainter, the iron smell of Holloway's blood from an hour ago that had dried on the corridor floor and would need to be dealt with eventually by someone who was not her. The red emergency lights had company now. The operators had brought their own illumination, weapon-mounted lights and handheld units, and the corridor had a patchwork quality, dark in some places and harshly bright in others. She passed 2 of Rusk's men zip-tied to the wall beside the storage closet, both alive, one watching her with an expression she didn't engage with. She passed the break room, where Marcus was sitting in a chair with a Mylar emergency blanket around his shoulders and a cup of something in his hands. One of the operators must have found the coffee station, and he looked up when she came past. Nora. His voice had the quality of someone returning from a significant distance. He looked at her shoulder. You're really bleeding. I'm aware. Should you be walking? Probably not. She kept moving. Stay there, Marcus. Drink your coffee. It's tea. Drink your tea. The imaging suite smelled like a construction site. Concrete dust, burnt polymer from the shape charge, and underneath it the antiseptic undercurrent of the medical space fighting a losing battle against the breach. The door frame was a ruin. The door itself was debris. Ceiling tiles had come down in one corner from the percussion, and the track lights swayed gently in the air, displaced by people moving through the space. Holloway was still on the gurney. There was a man in multicam and a patrol medic bag crouching beside the gurney. Sloane's medic, she assumed. And he was doing what she would have done, checking the IV lines, checking the chest decompression she'd placed, reading the portable monitor with the quiet attention of a professional who understood what he was looking at. Holloway was awake. His eyes found her the moment she came through the wrecked doorway, and something in his face shifted. Not relief exactly, more like the conclusion of a calculation. You're upright, he said. Mostly? The medic looked at her shoulder and straightened up immediately, which told her something about what her shoulder looked like that she chose not to examine. Ma'am, I need to... How's his pressure? 94/62. Improving. Left lung? Your decompression is holding. He needs OR, but he's stable enough to transport. The medic had shifted position, angling himself toward her. Ma'am, I need to look at that shoulder right now. In a minute. That is not an answer I can accept. Holloway made a sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite a cough, somewhere in between. She's going to make you work for it, he said. Fair warning. The medic, to his credit, didn't argue. He took a half step back and waited with the patience of someone who had learned that you couldn't physically carry a conscious ambulatory patient to care, and that the next best approach was to make care available and wait for the biology to override the stubbornness. Which it always did. Eventually. Nora walked to the gurney and checked the IV lines herself. Then she looked at the monitor. Then she looked at Holloway. The module's in pieces, she said. I heard. He'd heard the block come down. The sound had traveled up through the floor, and he'd known what it was before Sloane's medic had told him anything. Was it real? The swing? Yes. The aim? She held his gaze. The internal housing might be recoverable. Holloway was quiet for a moment. His eyes moved to the ceiling, then back to her. If it's not, then it's not. She said it plainly, without apology. You were going to die in the next 4 minutes when I found you in the bay. The drive was not my primary concern. It should have been. You were my patient. The intel on that drive was worth nothing if the man carrying it didn't survive to contextualize it. She checked the dressing on his shoulder wound. Still holding, the field packing she'd placed what felt like a week ago and had actually been 90 minutes. Which is a medical judgment call. I made it. Holloway looked at her for a long moment. You know what was on it? He said. No. Then how'd you know it was worth destroying? I didn't destroy it. I controlled the damage. She met his eyes. And I knew it was worth the risk because 4 soldiers died for it, and men like Rusk don't send 10-person strike teams into blizzards in Montana for bad intelligence. She straightened up, which cost her. So whatever's on it, it mattered. Which meant keeping it out of his hands mattered more than keeping it intact. Holloway was still looking at her. That's actually the correct operational calculus, he said, and he sounded slightly unsettled by this. I know. How do you know that? The medic made his move stepped forward while Holloway had her engaged in conversation, which was smart, and got his hands on her arm before she could redirect. She let him. The biology was doing what it always did, which was winning. Sit, the medic said. Not a request. She sat on the edge of the equipment rack. He got the improvised dressing off in sections, and she looked at the far wall and not at what he was doing, because looking at what he was doing was not going to improve anything about the situation. Holloway was watching. She could feel it. Special Operations Medic, she said. 18 Delta, the medic said, which was the Army's identifier for the course that turned combat medics into something considerably more than that. He was packing the wound with the same focused attention she'd given Holloway's shoulder an hour ago, and she thought, with a distant and slightly fractured amusement, that this was the most reciprocal emergency she'd ever been in. How long were you attached? Holloway's voice. Quiet. Attached where? You know where. She was quiet for a moment. The medic was irrigating. She concentrated on the wall. 3 years, she said. 2nd Ranger Battalion, then a year with a JSOC element that I'm technically not supposed to name, and the name wouldn't mean anything to you anyway because it had a cover designation. The medic's hands paused for exactly 1 second, then continued. Holloway said nothing. The red lights pulsed. I left, she said. Voluntarily. I'd done what I could do in that context, and I wanted to do something different. And small-town emergency nursing is different, so... She paused. That's the whole story. That's not the whole story, Holloway said. It's the part that's available. He accepted that. Or at least he stopped pushing on it, which with a man like Holloway probably amounted to the same thing. Sloan appeared in the doorway of the imaging suite. He looked at the medic working on Nora, then at Holloway on the gurney, then at the split-drive casing he was holding in an evidence bag. Recovery team says the internal array is intact, he said. The room absorbed this information. Holloway closed his eyes, opened them. Nora exhaled through her teeth, part pain from what the medic was doing, part something else. The housing cracked at the seam like you said, Sloan continued. He was looking at her in a way she recognized now. The same way Holloway had looked at her in the ambulance bay, the same way Brenner had looked at her in the trauma room. The look of recalibration. The central storage array took no damage. Everything's recoverable. Good, she said. You knew that was possible. I thought it was possible. There's a difference. Sloan walked into the room and stopped at the foot of the gurney. He was still holding the evidence bag, the shattered module visible through the plastic, and he looked at it and then at her with an expression she couldn't entirely parse. When Rusk moved for the drive, he said, you had about 1 second. Less. And you aimed for the seam. I tried to. Under those conditions. She looked at him. It was the right play. I'm not debating that. He set the bag down on the equipment rack beside her. I'm pointing out that it's not a play most people make. Or can make. A pause. Or would even think to make. Nora didn't have a response to this that she wanted to share, so she said nothing. The medic finished his work and started a wrap, and she looked at the ceiling and let him. From somewhere else in the clinic, she heard the sound of Brenner's voice. Not the words, just the cadence, the slightly elevated and unsteady quality of a man who was holding himself together in the aftermath of something he hadn't been built for and was asking questions to give himself something to do. Good. He was asking questions. That meant he was functional. She filed it under things she didn't have to worry about right now and moved it out of her immediate attention. "Rusk is in custody?" she said. "Zip-tied to a pipe in your basement," Sloan said. "His remaining people, 3 of them, are secured on the ground floor. We lost 2 operators in the initial breach." He said it flatly, without performance. The flat tone of someone who had been in this part of the job before and hadn't found a better way to say it. She looked at him. "I'm sorry." "Yeah." He picked up the evidence bag again, looked at the module inside it. "The data on this is going to fix that, hopefully. Clear Holloway's team. There are people in the field who don't know they're compromised. This gets them out before Rusk's network realizes what happened tonight." She thought about that. About the people in whatever country they were in, doing whatever work they were doing, with no idea that there was a drive in an evidence bag in a Montana clinic that currently held their lives in its cracked casing. The medic tied off the wrap and stepped back. "She needs surgery," he said to Sloan. "The round went through clean, but there's structural damage. She needs an OR within 6 hours for the best outcome." "We have 2 birds on the roof," Sloan said. "One is configured for medical transport." He looked at Nora. "Both patients." "I'm not leaving until what?" His voice was patient. "The situation is contained, Vance. Your patient is stable. Your building is clear. The device is disarmed." He looked at her, steady and direct. "What are you staying for?" She opened her mouth, closed it. He was right. She hated when people were right before she was ready for them to be. "Brenner needs to know the status of every—" "We'll brief him." Sloan picked up the evidence bag. "We'll brief everyone. That's my job. This—" He nodded at her arm. "That's yours." She looked at Holloway. Holloway looked back at her from the gurney with an expression that was exhausted and in pain and communicating something that she didn't have the bandwidth to process right now. An IOU, maybe. Something that would need to be addressed later, in a different room, when they were both capable of having conversations that lasted longer than 45 seconds. "Fine," she said. The medic immediately started breaking down his bag for transport, the way people who worked around difficult patients did, moving fast before the agreement expired. From overhead, through the ceiling, through the 2 feet of Montana snow that the storm had packed down to a dense, solid weight on the roof, the rotor wash of the idling helicopters was a steady vibration in the floor and walls. The storm was still out there. It was still snowing. The interstate was still buried. The county roads were still closed. And Black Pine County Clinic was going to be dealing with the aftermath of this night for longer than she wanted to think about. But the manifold was intact. The building was standing. Holloway's heart was beating. And the drive was in an evidence bag in Sloan's hand, cracked and whole, broken and full. She looked at the wrecked doorway of the imaging suite, the blown frame, the debris, the ceiling tiles on the floor. And she thought about the mercenary who had stepped through it with his rifle up and his attention on Holloway and his assessment of her already complete and wrong. She thought about all the times in her life that assessment had been wrong, and she'd been smart enough, or tired enough, or just plain undecided enough to let people keep thinking it. How useful that wrongness had been. How many rooms she'd walked into because of it. She slid off the equipment rack and stood up. The left arm was going to be a real problem for a while. She decided to be annoyed about that later. "Let's go," she said, and she walked through the wrecked doorway into the red-lit corridor. And after a beat, the medic followed her. And after another beat, Sloan followed him. And the clinic, battered, cold, reeking of blast residue and dried blood, and the ghost of that primer smell that would take 3 rounds of industrial cleaning to fully erase. The clinic held its shape around them as they moved through it toward the stairs and the roof and the dark Montana sky above. Outside, the storm was finally beginning to break. Not over, not finished, but the leading edge of it had passed, and in the gaps between gusts, if you looked east, you could see the first gray suggestion of a sky that intended, eventually, to become morning. Nora didn't look east. She was watching where she put her feet. The roof of Black Pine County Clinic was not designed for helicopter operations. That was Nora's first coherent thought when the stairwell door opened and the rotor wash hit her. a full-body pressure that plastered her scrubs against her skin and sent loose snow swirling up from the accumulated pack in horizontal sheets. Two Blackhawks sat on the roof with their rotors at flight idle, their landing skids sunk slightly into the snow, their running lights painting red and green arcs through the blowing white. Ground crew in cold weather gear were moving between the aircraft with the purposeful efficiency of people who had a timeline and intended to keep it. The cold went straight through her. She hadn't registered how cold she was until the door opened, which meant she'd been running on adrenaline and managed pain for long enough that her thermoregulation had quietly deprioritized itself. The wet scrubs against her skin in 20 below wind chill fixed that oversight immediately. The medic put a hand on her good arm and steered her toward the closer aircraft without ceremony, and she went because the alternative was standing on a rooftop in a Montana blizzard being stubborn about it, which she was capable of, but which served no immediate purpose. Behind her, she heard the second team bringing Holloway up on a portable stretcher, 4 operators carrying it with the careful speed of people who understood that the man on it was both a patient and an asset, and both designations required him to arrive alive. She got into the Blackhawk. The interior was configured as a medevac, fold-down litters, medical equipment mounted to the bulkhead, a crew medic already waiting who took one look at her shoulder wrap and started pulling supplies without being asked. The aircraft smelled like hydraulic fluid and the particular synthetic fabric smell of military cold weather gear worn by too many people in too small a space, and it was the most familiar smell she'd encountered in 6 years, and she sat with that for exactly 2 seconds before she put it away. Holloway's stretcher came in through the opposite door. He was still awake. She could tell by the way he tracked her across the interior, the alert quality of his eyes despite everything his body was currently managing. They got him secured on the opposite litter, and the medic moved between them, checking Holloway's lines and then coming back to her arm, and Nora sat with her back against the bulkhead and watched the ground crew pull away and felt the aircraft begin to move beneath her. Sloan got in last, just before the doors closed. He sat across from her and said nothing for the first few minutes of flight. Below them, through the small porthole window beside her shoulder, the clinic resolved into a shape, a small, lit rectangle in a vast white darkness, surrounded by the lights of the response vehicles that had finally managed to push through the county road closure. It shrank fast. Then it was gone, and there was only the darkness and the snow. Sloan had a tablet in his hands. He'd been working it since before they lifted off. She'd seen him doing it on the roof, the blue screen light against his face. He looked up from it now. "I need to ask you some questions," he said. "I figured. You want to wait until you're in a hospital bed, or now is fine?" She meant it. Waiting would mean sitting with her own thoughts in the interim, which she was less enthusiastic about. He nodded, set the tablet on his knee. "Walk me through the decision to move Holloway to imaging, from the beginning." She did. She kept it factual and sequential. The bay, the blood, the warning, the lockdown, the power cut, the boots on the lobby floor. She told him about the lead walls and the single point of entry and the inadequacy of both as a long-term solution. She told it the way she'd been trained to report. What she observed, what she assessed, what she did, and why. No editorializing, no justification of choices she'd already made and couldn't unmake. Sloan listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You didn't call for help," he said. "There was no help to call. Phones were down. Radio was jammed. Before the jam, before the power cut, when Holloway first told you what was coming, she understood what he was asking." "No." "Why not?" "Because calling Billings Dispatch means a county sheriff's response. Maybe 2 deputies, maybe 45 minutes out in that storm, probably more." She held his gaze. Rusk had a 10-person team with military training and suppressed weapons. A deputy with a sidearm doesn't help. He dies. So I made the call that limiting information and limiting access was more useful than generating a response I couldn't control. Sloan wrote something on the tablet. "That's an unusual call for a civilian nurse to make," he said. "It's the correct call." "I'm not saying it isn't." He looked up. "I'm saying most people in your position don't make it. Most people in my position haven't been in comparable positions before." "Right." He set the tablet flat on his knee. "Tell me about the JSOC element." She'd expected this. The moment she'd said it in the imaging suite, she'd known it was going to come back. You didn't mention a thing like that to a man like Sloan and have him file it under interesting and move on. It was 6 years ago, she said. I understand that. And there's a reason I didn't put it on my nursing resume. I'm sure there is. He wasn't pushing exactly. He had the patience of someone who understood that the direct approach wasn't always the efficient one. I'm not asking for an official debrief. I'm asking because what happened tonight, the choices you made, the way you moved, the basement, the calibration block, none of that is nursing school, and I'd like to understand what I'm actually looking at. The crew medic was checking Holloway's blood pressure on the other litter. Outside the porthole, nothing. Clouds, snow, darkness. Nora looked at her hands. Her right hand was clean. Her left hand, below the wrap, had dried blood in the creases of her knuckles. She didn't remember it getting there. It was probably Holloway's from the bay, or hers from later. After a while in a night like this one, the accounting got complicated. I was 26 when I attached to 2nd Ranger Battalion, she said. I'd done 2 years as a trauma nurse in Chicago before that. Level 1 center, good volume. I was fast and I didn't panic easily, and someone noticed that and suggested I look into military service. She paused. I did 3 rotations with the Rangers. Then someone else noticed something and suggested I consider a temporary attachment to a joint task force element that didn't have an official name. Task Force Meridian, Sloan said. She looked at him. He met her eyes with a look of mild, professional patience. You have my file, she said. I have what exists of your file, he said, which is not a lot. Task Force Meridian did good work at making sure their people's records were limited. He tapped the tablet. I have your nursing license, your Ranger attachment records, and a 6-month gap that the DoD classifies under a designation that makes my clearance look modest. Then you know more than you're letting on. I know the unit. I don't know your specific role. She considered this. Outside the aircraft, the darkness slid by. Montana below them, buried and white and indifferent. Trauma specialist, she said, forward embedded. They needed someone who could function in denied environments. No supply chain, no surgical backup, no evacuation window. Someone who could make decisions that the situation required without waiting for authorization that wasn't coming. She looked at her hands again. I was good at it. Why'd you leave? The question was simple. The answer was not. Because I was good at it, she said. Sloan waited. You get very good at operating in a specific kind of situation, and the situations keep finding you, and eventually you realize that the reason the situations keep finding you isn't luck. It's that you've been positioned for them by people whose job it is to position assets. She said the word without bitterness, just accurately. I was an asset. I was useful. And I decided I wanted to be a person again for a while. A pause. So I left. Sloan looked at her for a long moment. Did it work? He said. She almost smiled. Almost. I was doing pretty well until about 3 this morning. From across the aircraft, Holloway's voice, rougher now, the adrenaline finally burning off and the pain filling in behind it the way it always did. She's underselling it. Good at it means she ran 3 unsupported field interventions in active combat zones with 0 patient mortality. I had one, Nora said. Kapoor. Kapoor didn't make it to the LZ. Kapoor had a closed head injury and bilateral femoral damage. Kapoor was clinically dead twice before you got him to the LZ. He counts. He doesn't count. He thinks he counts. He sends a card every Christmas. The crew medic had stopped pretending to review his equipment and was just listening, which she noted and filed under things she'd address later. Sloan was watching the exchange with the focused attention of a man learning something by watching how 2 people talk to each other. How long have you known Holloway? He asked her. Tonight, she said. Sloan looked at Holloway. Holloway looked at the ceiling of the aircraft. Tonight, Sloan said again. Roughly 90 minutes of conscious interaction, Nora said. He was unconscious or semi-conscious for the rest of it. He briefed you extensively. He briefed me usefully. There's a difference. Sloan sat back against the bulkhead. He was doing that thing again. The quiet recalibration, the file being resorted in real time. She'd been watching people do it all night, and it had stopped bothering her somewhere around the time she'd stopped being able to feel her left arm properly. The debrief at Malmstrom is going to be, he started. Long, she said. Thorough, he said. Those aren't mutually exclusive either. No. He picked up the tablet again. I want to be straight with you, Vance. You're going to talk to people who outrank me considerably, and they're going to ask you a lot of the same questions I just asked, and some different ones. The drive recovery, the basement interaction, the choices you made with Holloway's treatment, all of it goes into a formal record. He looked up. That means your previous service is going to become a conversation again. She'd expected that too. She'd expected it from the moment she'd walked into the imaging suite and found Holloway alive and the situation sufficiently complicated that there was no clean line between tonight and before. I know, she said. Are you prepared for that? She thought about what prepared meant in this context. She thought about the 6 years in Blackpine, the routine of it, the particular satisfaction of small work done well, the frostbitten toes and the medication arguments, and the quiet night shifts where nothing happened and the coffee went cold and that was okay. She thought about how deliberately she'd constructed that routine and how completely one vehicle through one set of bay doors had dismantled it. Doesn't matter if I'm prepared, she said. It's what's happening. Sloan looked at her for a moment, then he nodded. A small thing, more acknowledgement than agreement, and went back to the tablet. Malmstrom Air Force Base materialized out of the darkness at 4:47 in the morning, its perimeter lights creating a flat orange glow against the cloud base that was visible from 10 miles out. They came in fast and low, the way military aircraft did when they weren't interested in announcing themselves, and touched down on the medical flight line with a firmness that Nora felt in her shoulder and acknowledged briefly before moving on. They took Holloway first, which was correct, and then the crew medic helped Nora out, which she allowed because the rotor wash and the cold and the blood loss had collectively arrived at a number that her body's remaining resources were struggling to cover. The base hospital was 50 meters from the flight line. It was the longest 50 meters she'd walked in recent memory. Inside was light, real light, white and overhead and fluorescent and not red, and warmth, and the smell of a medical facility that was adequately funded and adequately staffed. A trauma team was already waiting, which meant Sloan had been transmitting ahead, which meant the conversation she was about to have with considerably higher-ranking people than Sloan was already being organized before she'd cleared the door. They took her into a bay, a physician, Air Force Colonel's eagle on his collar, the kind of bearing that came from 20 years of being the most competent person in any given medical situation, looked at her shoulder wrap and then at her face and said, "How long ago?" "Approximately 2 hours," she said. "And you've been ambulatory since." "Mostly." He looked at the medic who'd come in with her. She was running a containment scenario in a basement, the medic said, and there was something in his voice that wasn't quite respect and wasn't quite bewilderment and was somewhere between the two. "When I found her," the colonel didn't change his expression. He was a military physician, which meant his threshold for being surprised by human behavior under duress was very high. He just said, "Get me imaging on the shoulder, full series, then we'll talk about the OR." They did not make her wait in a corridor, which she appreciated. Surgery was 2 hours and 40 minutes. She was awake for the beginning of it, the regional block, the draping, the prep, and then not. And then she was awake again in a recovery bay with an IV in her right arm and a structured immobilizer on her left shoulder and a quality of light coming through a window that suggested morning had arrived at some point while she wasn't paying attention. The pain was managed, which was a different experience from managed pain. She took a moment to appreciate the distinction. Sloan was in a chair beside the recovery bay, doing something on his tablet. He looked up when she moved. "Morning," he said. "The drive," she said. "Good morning to you too." "Is it intact?" "Full recovery. Data forensics team has been on it for the last 3 hours. It's significant." He set the tablet down. "Rusk's network is considerably larger than we understood. The data identifies operational infrastructure in 4 countries, including 2 sets of deep cover assets that were at direct risk." He paused. "They're being extracted now." She absorbed this. She thought about the people she'd never meet, in the places she'd never know, who were currently being moved to safety because a data module had cracked at the seam rather than the center. "And Rusk?" "Cooperative," Sloan said, in the tone of voice that suggested cooperative had been achieved through means that he wasn't going to detail in a recovery bay. "He's providing the network structure in exchange for a classified placement rather than a trial." A pause. "Which I don't like." But it's above my pay grade. Holloway? Orr went well. He's 3 rooms down. He asked about you before he went under. She wasn't sure what to do with that, so she didn't do anything with it. Brenner? She said. Sloane's expression shifted slightly. Not much. He's given a witness statement. He's been vocal about certain things. Vocal how? Sloane picked up the tablet, found something, and read. In my professional assessment, Nurse Vance's actions represent a significant departure from standard clinic protocols. And while the outcomes were ultimately favorable, the unilateral decision-making, failure to defer to senior medical staff, and deliberate concealment of relevant credentials constitute conduct that warrants formal. He stopped reading, set the tablet down, looked at her. She looked at the ceiling. He filed a complaint, she said. He filed a statement, Sloane said, which contains language that could be construed as a complaint. What's the difference? About 48 hours and several phone calls that I've already made. He laced his fingers together. Brenner is processing a significant experience in the way that certain people process significant experiences by identifying errors in other people's procedures. It's a coping mechanism. I'm not unsympathetic. A pause. But he's also incorrect on several points, and the people I've spoken to are aware of that. Nora looked at the ceiling for a moment longer. She understood Brenner. She'd been working with Brenner for 2 years, and she'd understood him from the first month. The particular shape of his competence, the specific way his authority needed to be the frame around every situation he was in, the discomfort he felt when things moved outside that frame. She didn't hold it against him. People were what their experience made them, and his experience hadn't included anything that prepared him for a night like this one. He was scared, she said. He was terrified, Sloane said. He didn't run. Sloane's expression acknowledged this. No, he didn't. He stayed in the building. He helped move Holloway when I asked. He didn't give Rusk anything in the basement. She looked at Sloane. Whatever he said in the statement, he was scared and he stayed anyway. That matters. Sloane watched her. You're defending him. I'm being accurate about him. She shifted against the pillow, which the shoulder reminded her was inadvisable. He doesn't understand what I am. He never did. That's not his fault. It's mine. I never told him. And when a situation happened that didn't match his model of what I was, he responded with fear and then with process. That's very human and very Brenner. She paused. The complaint or statement, or whatever it is, it'll resolve. Yes, Sloane said. It will. The way he said it made her look at him directly. He had the look of a man who had an item on an agenda and was deciding how to introduce it. Whatever you're about to say, she said, you should just say it. The commanding officer of the Joint Trauma Training Program at Fort Carson is a colleague of mine, he said. She's been trying to fill a senior instructor position for 11 months. Combat trauma, forward medicine, denied environment decision-making. He picked up the tablet again but didn't look at it. It's a leadership role. You'd be designing curriculum as much as teaching it. The students are 18 Deltas, Special Forces medics, Navy corpsmen, people who already know the basics and need someone who can teach them what the basics don't cover. Nora was quiet. The pay is a significant improvement over county clinic nursing, Sloane added, with the delivery of a man who suspected money wasn't the point, but included it for completeness. It's not about the pay, she said. I know. I built something in Black Pine. She heard how it sounded when she said it out loud. Built something as if she'd constructed infrastructure rather than taken a job and kept it. But that was what it felt like. It took time to build, and I'd like to... She stopped. To what? Sloane said. She thought about it. About the actual answer, not the reflex answer. She thought about what Black Pine County Clinic would look like after tonight. The new bay doors, the repaired imaging suite, the paperwork that would take months, the staff who'd remember what they'd heard and seen and smelled for years afterward, who'd be changed by it in ways they couldn't predict yet. Marcus, who'd brought tea to an operator in the break room during a tactical situation. Sandra, who'd held herself rigid against a wall for 40 minutes and not made a sound that gave Rusk any additional information. She thought about what it would feel like to drive back down that county road, when it was passable, in spring maybe, when the snow had moved on, and walk back through those clinic doors and sit at the nursing station at 2 a.m. and wait for frostbite cases and highway accidents. She tried to feel what that would feel like, What she felt instead was the specific, terrible clarity she'd felt in the imaging suite doorway when she heard boots on the stairs and understood what was coming and knew, without deciding, exactly what she was going to do. "Go back to what?" she said, mostly to herself. Sloan didn't answer. He just waited. "I'd want to review the curriculum before agreeing to anything," she said. "Reasonable. And I'd want input on the program design, not just delivery. That's the role. And I'm not relocating until my shoulder is cleared for full use." She looked at him. "I'm not walking into a teaching role in front of Special Forces medics with one arm in a sling. That's a credibility conversation I'd rather skip." 6 to 8 weeks, Sloan said, "based on the surgical report." "Then we talk in 6 to 8 weeks. Sloan put the tablet down for the last time. He reached across and offered his hand, which was a slightly unusual gesture given that she had an IV in her right arm and a shoulder immobilizer on her left. But she reached out and shook it anyway, because the gesture was the point, not the mechanics of it. "One more thing," he said. "There's always one more thing. The citation paperwork." He held her gaze. "It's not optional. What happened tonight, 2 of my operators are dead, and the mission is a success, and the reason for both of those things is substantially you. The record needs to reflect that." She thought about what it meant for a record to reflect something, about the 6 years of a record that hadn't reflected most of what she was, and how that had been her choice and had served her. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. He stood, picked up the tablet, moved toward the door of the recovery bay, and she was watching the morning light through the window when he stopped. "Vance," she looked. "Brenner's going to figure it out," he said. "People usually do after enough time." "Figure what out?" "That the reason you didn't tell him what you were—" He looked at her for a moment. "It wasn't concealment. It was courtesy. You were letting him be the doctor." She didn't respond. He left. She looked at the window, at the pale Montana morning pushing itself through the glass, gray and flat and cold, and completely indifferent to what the night had required of the people below it. Down the hall, 3 rooms away, Holloway was in recovery. She thought about what he'd said in the aircraft. He sends a card every Christmas. The lightness of it, the way it had come out of him without thinking, in the middle of an aircraft interior at 5 in the morning with 2 bullet holes and a compromised lung. Just a small fact, offered without weight. She thought about what Sloan had said. "He asked about you before he went under." She looked at her right hand. Clean now, the blood gone, just her hand. The morning continued to arrive steadily and without drama, the way mornings did regardless of what the night had been. She fell asleep watching the window and woke up to find the morning had committed itself fully. Pale winter light, the kind that didn't offer warmth but at least offered visibility, sitting flat across the recovery bay floor. There was a cup of coffee on the tray beside her bed, still warm. Someone had been in recently, which meant the nursing staff was doing their rounds quietly enough not to wake her, which she appreciated in the way that only people who had spent significant time on the other side of the nurse-patient relationship could appreciate. She picked it up with her right hand, drank it without examining the quality, and looked at the ceiling. Her shoulder informed her in its persistent and specific way that last night had been real. She already knew that, but the shoulder's reminder had a grounding quality that she found unexpectedly useful. She was trying to decide whether she could reach the call button with her right hand to ask for something to eat when the door opened and Brenner walked in. He looked like he hadn't slept. She knew what that looked like on a person because she'd been that person many times, and it had a specific quality. Not just the physical evidence, the eyes, and the set of the shoulders, and the slightly unmoored quality of someone whose body was running on chemistry rather than rest, but something underneath that, something in the way a person moved when they'd been awake long enough that their defenses had gone offline, and what was left was just the actual person, unmanaged. He was carrying a paper cup of coffee, his own, and he stopped in the doorway like he hadn't entirely committed to entering. She didn't say anything. He came in, sat in the chair Sloan had vacated, looked at his coffee. "I filed a statement," he said. "I know. I want to withdraw it." She looked at him. He was looking at his coffee, not at her, and his jaw had the set of a man saying something he'd decided to say before he'd fully worked out how to say it. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know I don't." He looked up. "I want to." He held her gaze. "I said things in that statement that were—" I was trying to make sense of the night, and I made sense of it in a way that was easier for me than it was accurate. She waited. I said you acted unilaterally without regard for medical hierarchy, he said. Which is, he stopped, started again. You moved the patient without consulting me. That's true. But I was standing there telling you to wait for authorities, and you were the only reason that man is alive. So the frame I put on it was self-serving. His voice was flat with the effort of saying this plainly. I know what self-serving analysis looks like. I don't like it when I catch myself doing it. Elias. He looked at her. You stayed in the building, she said. I was terrified. I know. You stayed anyway. She shifted slightly against the pillow. That's not nothing. I hid in a basement. You were held in a basement, which is different. And when I needed you to move a gurney through a dark corridor with armed men in the building, you moved the gurney. She looked at him steadily. You don't get to rewrite what you did just because you're embarrassed about what you felt. Brenner was quiet for a moment. Why didn't you tell me, he said, about your background? She'd thought about how to answer this since Sloan had said it in the recovery bay. It wasn't concealment, it was courtesy. She'd sat with that answer and found that it was true, but not complete. Because I wanted to be the night nurse, she said. That's the honest answer. I wanted to walk into that clinic at 6 in the evening and take temperatures and argue with insurance companies and go home when my shift ended. I worked very hard to build a life where that was what I was. She paused. If I'd told you about the Ranger attachment or the task force, you would have looked at me differently. I would have respected. That's not the same as seeing me the way I wanted to be seen. She held his gaze. I didn't want to be the extraordinary one. I just wanted to do the work. Brenner sat with this. His coffee was getting cold. He didn't drink it. Do you know what Marcus said this morning? He said. What? He said, and I'm quoting, Dr. Brenner, I don't think Nora ever needed us to think she was impressive. I think she just needed us to let her work. He looked at her. He's 26 years old. He's perceptive. He's right. Brenner put his coffee cup down on the edge of the tray. I am going to withdraw the statement, and I'd like... He stopped, tried again. When you're back on your feet, if you come back to Blackpine, and I understand if you don't, I'd like to do things differently. I don't entirely know what that means yet, but I'd like to. Nora looked at this man she'd worked alongside for 2 years, this competent and difficult and frightened and decent man, and she felt something that she hadn't expected to feel about Brenner, which was a kind of affection that had been there for a long time without her acknowledging it, underneath the friction and the daily negotiations of working for someone who didn't see you fully. Withdraw the statement, she said. We'll figure out the rest. He nodded, picked up his coffee, stood. At the door he paused in the way Sloan had paused, and she thought, distantly, that she was going to have to start anticipating these door pauses as a conversational structure. You took around for my patient, he said, without turning around. He was my patient too. Yes, Brenner said. He was. He left. The formal debrief happened at 11 that morning in a conference room 2 floors above the medical ward, and Nora attended it in a hospital gown with a shoulder immobilizer and socks with grippy bottoms, which was not how she'd imagined re-engaging with the military intelligence apparatus. But the apparatus had indicated it was coming to her rather than the other way around, and she'd decided the gown was a reasonable statement about the priorities in play. There were 4 people in the room besides Sloan. One she recognized from his photograph, a 2-star general named Marsh who oversaw the joint task force that Holloway's reconnaissance team had operated under. The others were introduced with names and no titles, which told her their titles were the kind that didn't get used in rooms that had windows. They asked the same questions Sloan had asked, and some different ones. She answered the same way, factual, sequential, no editorializing. When they asked about her operational judgment in the basement, she explained it. When they asked about her decision to partially destroy the module, she explained that too. When one of the no-title people asked whether she'd been operating under any direction from any entity she hadn't disclosed, she said no, and met his eyes while she said it, and he moved to the next question. When they were done, General Marsh looked at her across the conference table. The task force element you were attached to, he said. Task Force Meridian. You've maintained your clearances. They lapse after 5 years without renewal activity. They've been renewed, he said. She looked at him. Administratively, he said. Every 2 years, flagged for potential reactivation. He held her gaze. You didn't know? No. Someone thought you might be needed again. She sat with this information and decided, after a moment, that she wasn't surprised. Not really. She'd constructed 6 years of deliberate quiet in a county clinic in Montana, and she'd done it well, and a part of her had always understood that the thing you build your quiet around is also the thing that defines the quiet's edges. What does that mean right now? She said. It means the conversation Major Sloan started with you this morning. Marsh glanced at Sloan. The training program offer, that's real, and it stands on its own merits. But it's also, should you choose it, a potential bridge back to a more active role, if that's a direction you want to consider. Over time. She looked at the table, at the untouched glass of water beside her right hand. I want to be clear about something, she said. Marsh waited. I'm not interested in being repositioned, she said. I'm not interested in being an asset. If I take the training role, it's because I want to teach, and the people I'd be teaching deserve someone who wants to be there, not someone who's been managed back into a useful position. She looked at the general directly. If those two things are compatible, I'm interested in the conversation. If they're not, I'm going back to Black Pine when my arm clears. The room was quiet. One of the no-title people was writing something. Marsh looked at her for a long moment, and his expression did a thing that surprised her. It relaxed. Not entirely, not into warmth exactly, but into a kind of recognition. That's compatible, he said. Good, she said. She went to see Holloway that afternoon. His room was 3 doors down, as Sloan had said, and the door was open, which meant he was cleared for visitors or, at minimum, had declined to close it. She knocked on the frame anyway. He was propped up at about 40 degrees, which was the maximum the surgical team would allow with the rib work they'd done, and he was awake. He had the slightly scraped-out quality of someone who had been sleeping in fragments and was running on the thin, clear energy that came after significant blood loss and several hours of anesthetic. Present, alert, but with a quality like freshly washed glass, everything slightly more visible than usual. He looked at her when she came in. He looked at the shoulder immobilizer. How bad? He said. Manageable. 6 to 8 weeks and full function. She sat in the chair beside the bed. You? Longer. He said it without self-pity, just as a fact. The rib work is going to be... The recovery timeline is not exciting. He looked at the ceiling. My team lead wants me behind a desk for 4 months. Your team lead is correct. My team lead usually is. I still hate it. She almost smiled again. She seemed to be almost smiling at this man frequently, which was something she'd noticed and set aside. Your team, she said. The 4 who were killed. His jaw tightened. A small, controlled movement, but she caught it. What about them? Sloan said the drive is going to clear them. The false accusations. Yeah. He was looking at the ceiling, not at her. Rusk's network set them up, made it look like they were running intelligence to the other side. That's why the unit was dissolved, why the investigation was launched. He paused. They were dead before the SUV, professionally. Their families were told they'd been under federal investigation. Another pause, longer. That gets corrected now. That matters, she said. It should have happened before they died. Yes, she said. It should have. Neither of them said anything for a moment. The room had the particular hospital quiet of a place that absorbed sound. The HVAC, the distant beep of monitoring equipment, the institutional carpet-absorbing footsteps from the corridor. Kapoor, she said. Holloway looked at her. You mentioned Kapoor in the aircraft. I did. How do you know about Kapoor? He was quiet for a moment in the way of a man deciding how much to say. I was doing a joint rotation with an intelligence element that had overlapping operational space with Task Force Meridian. 3 years ago. I never met the medic who ran that compound intervention. I was 30 kilometers away, but I read the after-action. He looked at her. The after-action is one of 6 documents I've seen in my career that I would describe as remarkable. She looked at the window. It was a bad night, she said. The outcomes were extraordinary. The outcomes were adequate, she said. Adequate is what you get when everything goes wrong, and you do the best you can with what's left. Extraordinary is what people call it afterward when they weren't there. She looked at him. I lost a man. You lost one man with bilateral femoral damage and closed head trauma in a compound with no OR and no evacuation window for 9 hours. I still lost him. Yes, Holloway said. You did, and that's in the after action too. He held her gaze. It's what made me believe it. The fact that you wrote the failure the same way you wrote everything else. No mitigation, no framing, just patient did not survive. Here's what I did, and here's what I would change. She hadn't thought about that document in a long time. She'd written it in a forward operating base in a country she wasn't going to name, at a table that wobbled because one leg was shorter than the others, by the light of a headlamp, 40 hours after it happened. She'd written it because she'd been trained to write it, and because it was the right thing to do, and because writing it was the only way she knew to put the night somewhere outside herself. I didn't know anyone read it, she said. Someone always reads them, he said. The afternoon light was doing something specific in the room, coming through the window at a low angle, the way winter light in Montana did, flat and clean, and without the warmth that the same quality of light had in other latitudes. It caught the edge of the equipment on the wall and the IV line running into Holloway's arm and the shoulder immobilizer on Nora's left side, and just sat there, indifferent and illuminating. Sloan offered you the training role, Holloway said. It wasn't a question. He told you. He asked my opinion first, whether I thought you'd take it. She looked at him. What did you tell him? I told him I didn't know you well enough to have an opinion. A pause. Which was true at the time. And now? He looked at her with the clear, direct attention of someone who'd been in enough situations to stop wasting time on indirection. Now I think you'll take it. Not because of last night. You would have found a way to find last night, even if last night found you differently. But because you've been doing the work of that job in a county clinic in Montana without the title or the scope. And at some point, the gap between what you're doing and what you're positioned to do gets too wide to stand in. She thought about this. She thought about it honestly, without the reflex of deflection, which was harder than it sounded. She thought about what it had felt like in the imaging suite, in the corridor, in the basement. Not the fear, not the pain, but the clarity underneath both of those things. The sense of every decision being the right size for her hands. The specific, irreplaceable feeling of being exactly equal to what was required. Not because the situation was easy, but because she was precisely built for it and had spent 6 years pretending otherwise. I'm going to Black Pine first, she said. He didn't say anything, just waited. I left things in the middle. The clinic is going to need. There are staff who went through something significant, and the community response is going to be complicated, and I'm not going to disappear from that because something more interesting came along. She looked at him. I'll go back. I'll finish what needs finishing, and then I'll look at the training program. That's the right call, he said. I know. I wasn't agreeing. He stopped. Reconsidered. I was agreeing, he said. I know, she said again, and this time she did smile, not almost. 6 weeks later, Black Pine County Clinic reopened. The new bay doors were steel reinforced, which the contractor had suggested, and Brenner had approved without his usual deliberation about cost-benefit analyses. The imaging suite had a new door frame, new ceiling tiles, and a calibration block that Marcus had ordered as a replacement, and then, inexplicably, mounted on the wall with a small placard beneath it that read, Property of the Night Shift. Brenner had looked at it for a long time and said nothing and left it there. Nora came back for the reopening. Her left arm was at 60%, which was enough. The surgeon at Malmstrom had called it exceptional recovery, and she'd said it's adequate, and he'd looked at her like she was a difficult patient, which she was, and discharged her 2 days ahead of the projected timeline. She stood in the ambulance bay on the morning of the reopening and looked at the new doors and thought about how little of what had happened in this building on that night was visible now. The structure had absorbed it. The walls had been repaired, the floors had been cleaned, the imaging suite had been returned to function. If you didn't know, you wouldn't know. She knew. Marcus found her standing there. You're doing that thing, he said, coming to stand beside her. What thing? The thing where you look at something for a long time and don't say anything. I do that thing? You do that thing constantly, he said. I've seen you do it with a medication chart. She looked at him. He was wearing a new clinic sweatshirt. The county health department had sent them as a gesture of support, navy blue with a gold caduceus, and Marcus had put his on immediately and was slightly overdressed for the morning temperature in the way of a person who was proud of where he worked. "How are you?" she said. And she meant it, not as a pleasantry. He thought about it seriously, which she appreciated. "I'm okay," he said. "I'm better than I thought I'd be. Sandra is—" He paused. "Sandra is working at her cousin's bakery in Billings. She said she needs a break from emergency settings, which I think is a completely reasonable thing to say." "It is?" "She said to tell you she's good." "I'm glad." They stood in the bay together for a moment. The county road was clear. The spring thaw had pushed the last of the serious snow back in late March, and now it was mud season, which was its own particular challenge in this part of Montana, but it was navigable mud rather than impassable ice, and that distinction mattered. "You're leaving," Marcus said. Not an accusation, just a fact he'd arrived at. "After today." "The military thing?" "Teaching," she said. "Fort Carson, Special Forces medics mostly." "Yeah." He nodded slowly. "Yeah. That—" He stopped. Started again. "That makes sense. In a way I couldn't have explained 3 months ago, but makes complete sense now." "You could have explained it," she said. "You're the one who told Brenner I just needed to be let to work." He looked at her. "He told you that." "He told me that." Marcus looked at the new bay doors. "I'm going to apply to physician assistant school," he said. "I've been thinking about it for a year, and I've been not doing it, and I think—" He stopped. "I think I've been waiting for something to make the decision obvious, and it turns out the thing that made it obvious was a very bad night in November." He looked at her. "So, there's that." She looked at this 26-year-old man who had made tea for an operator during a tactical situation and mounted a calibration block on a wall with a placard, and was now, apparently, going to go to PA school because one night had made some things clear that had been unclear before. "You'd be good at it," she said. "I hope so." He put his hands in the pocket of the sweatshirt. "I'm going to be scared." "Yes," she said. "You are." "Is that—" "It's fine," she said. "It means you understand what you're doing." Holloway came to Black Pine. She hadn't expected this. She'd gotten text messages through the encrypted channel Sloan had set up for post-operation communication. Brief, factual updates about his recovery, about the network takedown, about the formal clearance of his team's names, and the military honors that had been posthumously restored. She'd responded in kind, brief, factual. Then one morning, 3 days before she was due to leave for Fort Carson, she came out of the clinic after her last shift, and he was leaning against a truck in the parking lot in civilian clothes, his left arm still in a partial brace that he clearly found annoying based on the way he was holding it, and the late afternoon Montana sky was doing that thing it did in spring, where it turned the specific amber color of old photographs. She stopped. He looked at her. "You drove from Colorado," she said. "I did." "With one working arm." "I have one working arm and one mostly working arm," he said. "The truck is an automatic." She stood there in the parking lot with her shift bag on her right shoulder and looked at him and tried to organize her response to his being here, which was proving unexpectedly difficult. "Why?" she said. "Because I wanted to see the building," he said. "I was unconscious for most of my time in it. I have a significant experience with a building I have no visual memory of." He looked at the clinic. "Also because you leave in 3 days and I wanted to have a conversation that was longer than 45 seconds before you did." She stood there. "That's a long drive," she said. "It is. For a conversation. Depends on the conversation." She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back. The amber light sat on everything equally. The clinic, the parking lot, the truck, both of them, without preference or judgment. "There's a diner 2 miles down the road," she said. "The coffee is bad, but the pie is good." "I've been eating hospital food for 6 weeks," he said. My standards are low." "Then let's go." She left Black Pine on a Thursday. The county road was passable, the sky was clear, and she took the route through the valley rather than the bypass because the bypass was faster, and the valley was the drive she knew. The mountains stood where they'd always stood, white at the peak still, green pushing up the lower slopes, and the light came off the snowpack in the way it did in spring. Bright and particular, the kind that asked you to pay attention. She'd said goodbye to Brenner the day before. He'd shaken her hand in the way of a man who wanted to do something else with his hands and had decided a handshake was what the moment would permit. He'd told her the clinic was going to be fine. She'd told him she knew. He'd told her that if she was ever back in Black Pine, she should stop in, and she'd said she would, and they'd both known that stopping in was a version of a relationship they were inventing in real time, but it was a real version, and that was enough. The drive to Fort Carson was 11 hours. She stopped once for gas and coffee at a station outside of Billings where the attendant recognized her from the news coverage and started to say something, and she smiled and paid and got back in the car before the something finished forming. The news coverage had been extensive for a week, and then it had moved on the way news moved on, replaced by other things requiring attention. She'd given one statement through Sloan's office and declined everything else. The citations were in a folder in her bag. She hadn't looked at them since the ceremony at Malmstrom, which had been brief and specific and attended by fewer people than the news coverage had implied was warranted, and she'd been grateful for that. Holloway had been there. They'd stood side by side in the formal space and listened to their names read, and she'd thought, standing there, that the citation was a document about one night in November, and the night in November was already becoming a thing she carried, rather than a thing she was currently doing, and that was how it was supposed to work. And she was fine with it. She reached Fort Carson at 7 in the evening. She signed in at the gate, drove to the temporary housing building, found her room, and set her bag on the bed. The room was small and functional and smelled like industrial cleaning products and the faint ghost of 100 previous occupants, all of whom had also come here for reasons that seemed large and arrived to find a small room and a functional bed. She sat on the bed. She thought about Black Pine, about the new bay doors and the calibration block on the wall, and Marcus in his navy sweatshirt and Brenner's handshake. She thought about the night, the one she now carried, the 9 steps down into the basement, and the chemical smell and the detonator in Rusk's hand, and the specific quality of the silence in those 2 seconds when he looked at her across the barricade and forgot, just for a moment, about everything he'd planned. She thought about what it meant that she'd been there for it, not by design, not by positioning, not because anyone had managed her into place, but because she'd been the night nurse, and the night had needed more than a night nurse, and she'd been both things, the one the night expected and the one it needed. And the gap between those two things was the gap she'd spent 6 years standing in. It wasn't a gap anymore. She picked up her phone. Holloway had texted, which she'd expected because he'd been texting since she left Black Pine in the way of someone who had found a frequency and was staying on it. Made it back. Arm is fine. Desk is terrible. She typed back, "Desk builds character." His response came in 30 seconds. "I have enough character." She put the phone down. She sat in the small functional room and thought about the first class she'd teach. 18 Delta candidates, Special Forces medics, people who already knew how to do everything and needed someone who could show them what everything didn't cover. She thought about what she'd say on the first day, how she'd start it, what the first hour of the first class would look like. She thought about the calibration block, about aiming for the seam. She thought about 9 steps down in the dark, counting without deciding to count, and the way the body held knowledge that the mind sometimes forgot it had, and how the most important thing you could teach anyone who was going to work in the dark was that the knowledge was already there, that it had been there all along, built into them by every difficult thing they'd survived and kept moving through, and that the only real question was whether they trusted it when it mattered. That was what she'd teach. She lay back on the bed. The ceiling was unremarkable. The room was quiet. She closed her eyes. Courage doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wait for the right moment, or the right credentials, or for someone to finally recognize what you are. It shows up in the dark, in the wrong clothes, with a job to do, and it does the job. The only thing it asks is that you stop waiting for someone else to tell you you're ready.